The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. This is Michael Cummings. I think I know everybody here except one or two people. So I want to introduce the star of the show, which is Ryan. Anytime Ryan's on a webinar, he tends to be the star of the show. And
Just can't help
Guijae,
it.
Guijae, who I can now pronounce his name properly, so I have it locked in my brain to make sure I address him properly. So I personally am very excited about this because I think this is a asset that not many MSPs are going to have, which you're going to have access to kind of two world-class salespeople, but also salespeople who have developed sales forces over time and therefore have a depth and breadth of knowledge about how to actually, today we're mostly going to be talking about how to get appointments, right? And rather than butchering his resume and his background, I will let Guijae introduce himself and tell you a little bit about his story. And then this is going to be the kickoff. That's why it's done in webinar form. This is going to be a kickoff for a program that we're going to put in place with an SVP, where we're going to have a monthly or potentially bi-monthly meeting like this, which is dedicated totally to building the competency of our people to get appointments in the beginning, and then how to handle the sales process once you get an appointment. Right. So I'm actually very excited to work with Guijae, and I'm always excited to work with Ryan. But what I really want to do is come up with a competency model for both our business development people, our CAMs, and our owners about how we can become the best in the industry at getting appointments.
And then, Michael, we want to make sure people have the opportunity to unmute and ask questions too, if we can keep it conversational at some point. So Guijae and I can't control that on our end. I think only you can.
Yeah. Did you unmute yourself, Ryan, or did you come in the other link?
Well, no, we were on as panelists, so it's easy for us to do that.
Okay, I can. So then, let me just do it this way. There's a chat box there, and if somebody has a question or somebody wants me to unmute them, I will unmute them, and then you can ask your question live. So if we want to make this, ultimately, this will be on it'll be on Teams or something like that, so it'll be a little bit much more freeform. But for today, I really wanted to get Guijae's story and to get his advice on game changers. Right. So like if we're not getting the appointments to the extent we want to now, what can we work on most immediately and most profoundly to make a change? And him and I have had some conversations about that. So just to be clear, there's a chat box in the lower right-hand side. You can just type something in there and send it to me, send it to the entire audience. And that way Ryan, Guijae, or I can actually answer it. And I've been patting myself on the back, Guijae. I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Am I not?
It's Guijae. That's correct.
Guijae. All right. So with that, why don't we set it up so the three of us can kind of have a conversation here. We do have an agenda that you've all seen, so we know what we're going to cover here. But Guijae, why don't you just tell somebody, the short version of your business life story?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll do it real quick. 1 minute. So I tried to run away from sales. I studied philosophy for undergrad and grad school with the intention of going to work for a venture capital, private equity, or analyst firm like Gartner or IDG or Forrester. But, I really believe that calling's a two-way street. It's internal and external. And I realized that when I first got into my first sales gig, I was selling Sprint B2B solutions. So that's UCaaS to machine-to-machine modules, IoT. And I just didn't really want to do it because I thought that it was the insecurity of being perceived as a sleazy, used car salesman. And I think I tried to run away from it. My first job in software, I started as a sales development rep, and really in the software world, that just means that my goal was to book meetings. And I started my career making about $240 a day just to get in front of our market, if you will, and to generate meetings. And what I learned there was that not that more dials equals meetings off the bat, which was the case, but I learned just more about the buyer and really learned to understand the buyer journey. Fast forwarding just to kind of my career track, really more, I don't like doing this just to boast myself, but to contextualize where my expertise comes from. I'm what I call a commercial operator for software as a service companies. That's where my subject matter expertise has been, specifically for top of the funnel. So prospecting, messaging, campaigning, and aligning with marketing. I've built 3 SDR teams from scratch, from recruiting to dashboarding to comp plans to go to market. and now I am the director of sales at Intera. Work with Ryan, and I think we have a really interesting story, conversation for another time, but really came together going, okay, Ryan's the MSP guy, I'm the SaaS guy. What if we kind of blended it together and try to see if we can make some magic in a predictable way, but also learning a lot from what you learn in the MSP world. So that's a very short, skinny version of who I am and where I've been.
And is all of your previous SaaS and software stuff been in B2B?
B2B SaaS.
Yeah, B2B SaaS. Okay, that's an important difference, right? Because it's a whole different ballgame calling up an owner or calling up a C-level executive than it is trying to sell them, software.
Yeah, marketing technology, education technology, and then my last, and then a couple times over in cybersecurity, and it's kind of where I've landed.
So I think in both today and going in the future, let's pretend everybody on the call is either somebody that's involved in business development or somebody that manages people in business development. So they're effectively our audience today. And what I got, it was funny, I was just having a call with one of the people in STP who has a full-time caller, and it became apparent to me that there's a clear process in all this stuff, and there's kind of difference makers, right? In terms of whether you're change one thing, it's going to yield more than if you don't change the one thing, in a sense. So when you and I were talking, you made a big point about saying everything is driven by your ideal client profile. And I always say the same thing, but I'm not as convincing, I think, as somebody like you would be. So why is that at the heart of everything you do?
I think it started because I didn't take that into consideration. I think I just called anybody and everybody that had a phone number that I could call and speak to. And I think what I learned was, again, about the ICP or ideal client or customer profile. It's who is it that finds the most, what do your customers look like, your current customers? And who are the people that are going to find the most value in the problem that you solve for? And, breaking that down a little bit, I think that gets everywhere from, account level information. How big is the organization? What is their business model like? What is the nature of their team? And depending on what solution, there's different variables, like how big is your sales team? What is your tech stack, et cetera? For where we are today at Intera, we're focusing on companies that are in highly regulated financial institutions. And as I have done a look back analysis, and what I mean by that is I went into our database and understood why people buy. I've also set up meetings with our current customers through account management to meet with them and ask a couple of questions like, hey, why did you buy? What is it that we help you with? What was your current state and your future state with our partnership? And really understand our customer, understand what pain points they had, what were compelling events as to why they bought. After that data exercise, you kind of have a piece of paper where it goes, here's the theme of the top 4 or 5 reasons as to why people come to our company and what they look like. So at a high level, I'll start with that. That is what I mean by the ICP, or ideal customer profile.
Okay. So let me tell you that you're probably been in the MSP world long enough to get this. So the challenge most of our people face is that they're calling into or trying to get meetings with people that already have an MSP. And the knee-jerk reaction is, yeah, we're pretty happy with our MSP. They're nothing terrible, so there's no reason for us to meet. That's the typical roadblock most of our people will, in both marketing and sales, are going to run into, right? So let's just use that as a premise and say, okay, your job is to train the sales force, Guijae and Ryan, and what are the things we want to make sure they get, given that kind of context? What are the things we start working on together, right? So we talked about the ideal client profile, and that's got to translate into a decent list and a scrub list and all that stuff. So let's say we got that, and we're getting people. I got a good example. Somebody who's made 800 calls, had 40 conversations, and like 1 appointment, right? That wouldn't be that unusual in some of those cases. Some people would make that many calls. So that's the sales force or the buying situation we're trying to improve. So where do we start, Guijae? What would you say is our first step?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk a little tactical first. I'll start with accepting the rejection, right? It's, hey, listen, I totally understand. And getting a little bit more tactical, what I'm trying to do is again, everything's very integrated. You'll notice that in the theme of how I think about my framework of kind of top of the funnel, this prospecting and getting meetings. It goes back to ICP, understanding pain, right, of our ICP, and then really driving value. So to me, what that looks like is, and Michael's been really awesome just teaching me about the reality of the world of MSP and how, unlike SaaS, in the software world, there's not always like a compelling event. It's not always this super differentiated feature that's going on. But really for us, it's, what I like to teach my reps, something really simple is, hey, listen, you know what? Our customers X, Y, and Z, they actually said the same thing to me when I made this introductory call. But the main reason why we had another call and we continued the discussion was because, and then you insert your 3-4 pain points that that you solve for your customers. So from like, every situation is different. But I mean, one, I would typically do some homework and find, do some research, whether it's on the website, LinkedIn, or calling other people within the buying committee, assuming I'm calling a high-level power, right? Maybe I'm calling other people within IT to understand their situation, their tech stack. I'm either one, hitting them with something that's of relevance due to my research, or I'm going in to really define ICP and try to see if there's pain. Quite frankly, I'm getting in there to try to disqualify them. But you're not going in to put a gun to their head and try to get all crazy and go, do you want to talk to me or not? But you got to position value. But I am trying to disqualify them to see if they're even a fit.
Yeah, like when we were talking originally, you were saying there's 3 things that are on the mind of somebody when they pick up the phone and they realize it's somebody like you. And what are those three things, and how do you use those to your advantage?
Yeah, psychologically, your prospects, when they receive a phone call, data shows that it's who are you, what do you want, and when is this going to end? And that psychologically, that's the case. So how I've reverse engineered that, it's nothing complicated, but typically I train my teams to go in with a very simple, unless it's something targeted campaigns perspective. Hey, Guijae with Intera, how are you today? Just good. Hey, do you have 20 seconds for me to tell you why I called? So I like to do the 20 seconds, even though it's cheeky, but when it comes to that initial hook, it's all about pattern disrupt. So just like I'm looking at a pipeline of stages, new opportunity, qualified scoping, etc., I like to look at a staged approach, even to my prospecting framework. So step 1, pattern disrupt and get their interest. I'm not all about the Sandler methodology, but especially in the front end of the conversation, I do want to get a level of their attention and consent of, hey, listen, why are you calling? I'm Guijae with Intera. Who are you? What do you want? Hey, do you have 20 seconds for me to tell you why I called? And when we're going to get off and answer that question as well. So that's kind of where I start to get into the second stage of that conversation.
And when you say pattern disrupt, just so people understand, that's like their natural thought process is, how do I get this person off the phone? And you're trying to interrupt them.
For the sales reps and the individual contributors on the phone, just go to your CEO, go to your founder, and ask them to pull up their LinkedIn messages or their voicemail and get a sample. You'll notice a theme of how they typically get reached out to. Just do not that, and you'll be pattern disrupted.
Yeah. So then I think what everybody is wondering is, like, after you've told them those 3 things, how does that conversation or dialogue transition?
So that second stage of the call, now that I got them to listen to me, really one of 2 routes. Route 1 is you've done a lot of personalization and research, and you want to drive them with what you think matters to them based on that data. Or 2, you're going with really driving ICP. So in that first channel, for example, I was in marketing technology. I would cold call CMOs. Every morning I would block on my calendar from 7:50 a.m. to 8:25 a.m. It's very strategic why I do that. Typically, I noticed that most of the CMOs in the commercial mid-market space, that's when they were getting in or out of their car to walk into work after they dropped off their kid. And so when I blocked off that time and called, I would do a lot of research. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm looking at different articles. I go to webinars like this and listen to what my buyers and influencers care about. So one example was, there was a CMO, and they stated within their in a webinar that they were hosted on, hey, we just got started with ABM. It's just a marketing strategy. We started with this new marketing strategy, and for next fiscal year, our goal is to streamline marketing operations and scale our program. So my cold call sounded like this. Hey CMO, Guijae with company X. I probably caught you off bad time. You have 20 seconds for me to tell you I called. Yeah, I'm walking into work. What can I help you with? I was just doing some homework and I noticed that you got two primary strategic initiatives that you're looking to achieve this year, which is really streamlining marketing operations and scaling your ABM program. We don't have to talk too much now because I know you're going in, but could we find some time next week to have that further discussion? And I would probably have about a 95% conversion rate to a meeting with that type of pitch because I have data. Second approach is if I don't have that data and I'm going a little bit more colder with the value prop and understanding our ideal customer profile. Yeah, so this is what I did at my last company, Capsulate, where I teach my reps to do this startup and we need to get the word out there.
Yeah.
Same approach. Hey, you have 20 seconds. Yeah, sure. So I keep hearing the same thing over and over from directors of security operations. It's that they got an EDR in place. They got CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, and SentinelOne, phenomenal for Windows. But when they're migrating to the cloud and they need to consider a Linux-based solution, it's way too heavy and you lack visibility. I was wondering if you resonated with that. And somewhere in there, I inserted working with companies like Fastly, Snowflake, Spotify, because that was our ICP. The person I was calling was similar to that realm. And that opens it up to conversation. And from there, that's a whole different channel. But I would start with those two channels for that level 2 of prospecting of diversion.
And so let's say,
Michael, just candidly, we're basically working on those exact same tactics for Antera right now. So we're really trying to identify our differentiators, do our research. We're list building and all those things. So towards the end of this call, if it makes sense, I don't know if Guijae can share. We can also kind of show you because I know there's a few people on the call that I've talked to even the last week that are trying to figure out like total addressable market in a specific geography. Guijae and I have done a lot of work on trying to like work backwards based on data points to understand how many leads we need on the list to hit our recurring revenue goals. So we can we can talk through some of those things too, which you can work down to an individual contributor.
So let's go back in time, Ryan, when you were a new salesperson for that little tiny MSP up in Detroit or wherever it was. Do you remember what your calls sound like once you started getting appointments?
Yeah, very similar to what Guijae just described. I mean, they were very pointed and they were vertical specific.
Yeah, so you used to call up
we were doing research. I mean, that was the big change.
Yeah, so you were doing like law firms, if I remember correctly, and you just say, hey, we just been talking to a lot of, first of all, I remember you joined the ALA, and then you used the knowledge you got there about how to make the phone calls, right?
Yep. Yeah, we would reference like other ALA members on the call and say we work with, Laura Hinks over at Phildo, whatever, and and that would at least get us into a conversation where we could then go through kind of our process. Yeah. But I will say, as the MSP market has evolved, I think we need to be much more specific. This is gut. We don't have, and candidly, we're starting our campaigns now, but I think the idea of our MSP is better than your MSP is not near specific enough to get an appointment anymore, right? So, majority of the people on the call are doing things in security. I think there's a unique opportunity to position security. If it's vertical focus, I would beat to death the vertical you work in and what you know about that vertical, what EMR, ERP, you want to say to them what they have to establish credibility. So
I'm with you there. I think it's funny because as Guijae was talking, I was trying to figure out like how much research can you actually do if you're trying to call like 100 people a week, right? But I think what you're saying is you want to do enough research to, ideally you want to personalize stuff ultimately in your outreach, but just being conversant and knowing the language and knowing the pain points, I think is important in all the stuff. I mean, not just the call, but the marketing, everything you do.
Yeah, and our big thing right now we're looking for is, we're trying to identify firms in financial services or insurance, 150 to 1,000 employees that work with both an MSP and an MSSP or one of the two. So we've gotten good at being able to determine that before we call. Like we know if they've got 300 people, they probably have 5 to 6 on their IT bench, and that means that they are likely outsourcing, right? So like we're doing a lot of that filtering like at the list level first, and then Guijae is building out the strategies to call in. But if you're going into smaller markets and you're going after medical offices or
law firms,
I do think when you look at volume prospecting, you really do have to see I'm just going to, Doug Miller's on the call. So you guys have calling data for years. You should be able to mathematically determine how much of an addressable market there is in a given city to see if there's even enough volume available to you. So those are some of the things we're working on. Like we've had to expand the geography of our list because when we look at what we're projecting ratios to be, there's not enough of the kind of ICP for us in Chicago for us to hit our goals.
Oh, no.
So I think that's, we're going very vertical specific, but I think those exercises also need to kind of be married with this. When I hear someone making 800 calls and getting down to one appointment, if that person's being effective in their style and everything, you got to look at, how on earth are they going to get enough appointments to survive?
I think you hit on something too, which what I've noticed in just even talking to Guijae now and my experience with you and like Sean is I think part of Guijae's pattern disruption is not to sound like a salesperson, right? And I think a little bit about the approach, and I think you're going to talk about this in a second, Guijae, about a lot of it is just style in a sense, right? It's coming at them as like an equal or like a similar business executive in a sense, and having that in your brain allows you to have a different kind of conversation.
Yeah, I think, again, I know this experience because I've done the opposite, right? Earlier in my career, I was as technical as our solution engineer at a marketing tech. It's not cybersecurity, it's marketing technology, right? But I could run up my own demos, and I would try so hard to be so technical to level with them, and I realized that wasn't right. So on one hand, you should know what you're talking about, but don't let that insecurity of, ooh, you're way older than me, you have so much more experience than me, let that drown you. I think as long as you understand business, and I think this is where it's integrated with having groups like this and having your leadership team partner with you, equip you in understanding things like, high level P&L, profit and loss, looking at return on investment, looking at how operators think about their business. These are great enablement exercises to help early, reps to build that confidence. And from there, you got to do, and I'm not saying that's the be all end all. Reps, onus is on you to go do your own homework. I listen to a podcast probably once a morning. I'm typically on LinkedIn following people that I want to get after. Like, I do my homework to understand what I need to know. But as I've grown in my career, I know what I need to learn and spit out the rest. Because as curious of a person I am, it doesn't help me. What I tell myself is your time is very valuable and expensive. So don't just go down a rabbit hole in the name of curiosity. And I think that's a exercise that I think as reps need. It needs
Gary,
to build.
if you could rattle off a few, what resources would you give to a bunch of folks on the call who are picking up the phone? Where should they look for? Because I will say one of the like attractive things in hiring Guijae to me was like he's a student of sales. And like he studies it, right? So like what resources would you recommend to people on the webinar to go take a look at?
I'll spin off 3, 2 books and a podcast. One book is Gap Selling by Keenan, GAP, Gap Selling. Premise just being current state, future state, and identifying the gap. And it gets very, it does that approach, but also gets very tactical on how to prospect and pick up the phone. Gap Selling by Keenan. It's a red book. Second book is by Jeb Blount. It's called Fanatical Prospecting.
That's a good one.
Fanatical Prospecting by Jeb Blount. And it's just a great book, and you just want to pick up a phone after you're done. Another one that's similar is New Sales Simplified by Mike Weinberg. 2 books that go kind of hand in hand. It teaches about sales process, and it's really about the customer and the buyer journey, but really tactical. So Fanatical Prospecting by Jeb, J-E-B as in boy, Blount, B-L-O-U-N-T, and New Sales Simplified by Mike Weinberg. Last one is one that I'm listening to recently. It's called 30 Minutes to President's Club. It is a podcast. It is literally 30 minutes, and they bring on sales leaders, and it's the most tactical. I have a lot of podcasts I listen to, from go-to-market stuff to private equity, startup, but this one's tactical. This is, you walk away with 3 or 4 new things that you can try on the phone the next day. 30 Minutes to President's Club, and it is on the Apple podcast, or just Google it. It's by Armand Farouk and Nick Sigelski. It's a podcast.
Cool.
So let's give you guys a very practical example, then we'll get back on the agenda, Guijae and Ryan. So let's say you picked up the call, you did your, here I am, here's, where I work, here's why I'm calling. And you start to try to get the owner of a small business who currently has an MSP, right? And you wanted to start to go down the security, like Ryan was saying, the security track, right? How do you deal with you say, well, how you're currently dealing with search security, and they say my MSP's already got us covered there. What would be your next pivot?
Man, I can think of a dozen things, but
that's
some of the first.
Seriously, this would be really helpful to people.
Some of the first things that come to mind are like, what is the basis they use to make security recommendations to you? Like, right. How do they make this to you? What causes them to recommend that product? What do they base that on? Is it tied to any known well or established IT frameworks? If they go, we don't know what that means, and go, well, just then I would just suspect that as they get excited about a product, you'll probably see the product. That would be one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is, are they proactively speaking to you about security? Like, are they, do they have, I think so many questions, like, do they have any sort of frontline exposure? Have you ever been, like, have they ever dealt with ransomware? Have they, I think I would just really pepper them with questions. Like, the good thing right now for security is most owners of organizations are in peer groups. Like, Guijae and I were on a discovery call this morning. This is like real data. We were meeting with they have 200 users. They're a mortgage company. He just got out of a meeting with their CEO, and the CEO's initiative was, I never want to be hit with ransomware. I heard about this in this meeting, right? So like the thing, if you're speaking to that owner, like if you can get them talking about what they're hearing of their peers, right? They're like, now there's never been a better time to position security as an MSP. Everyone's hearing about it every day. So I would really poke at that. Like, what are your peers telling you? What are the peer level companies to you doing that you're not doing? When's the last time someone evaluated this for you? Like, can we take a quick look? I don't know. We could probably build 100 questions you could do around security.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned, because when I was talking to people that brought this up, it's like the logical question to me says, well, how do you know your MSP is doing a good job for security, right? So
yeah, I would really wedge that. Like, how do you know they're doing a good job? Like, do they do what they ask you to do? Yeah. So especially there's a lot of folks on the call who have a pretty mature security stack. Those are great conversations to have with your SDRs about how you, as the MSP, limit your the risk you pose to the organizations you work with.
Yeah.
Right. Like, those are, I don't know. There's a lot of things I would think about on that security side.
How about you, Guijae? What is your pivot or wedge question, or whatever term we use for that? I'm already happy with the MSP.
I think when I've taken a look at that look back analysis without pulling up the skirt too much, but I think it's that being proactive, being a little bit more connected, and reverse engineering that into a question, right? Asking them, hey, like asking questions like, hey, how do you know that it's working out, right? I think something that's big in security right now is, okay, like like philosophically, security is a defense tactic, therefore it's tough to measure. Now, we figured out ways to do that, but just naturally it's not very easy. So asking questions like, hey, how are you currently measuring different ways to measure success? What do your QBRs look like, and how proactive are your teams in being a true partner and extension as a partner that's forward looking, right? And asking them compelling questions that are aligned to your value prop, and making sure you're building that credibility.
Yeah, I will say the hard part we'll call it downstream, let's say sub 100 users, and think of like a medical practice. We have to be aware that their current MSP, if we're calling them, they should have one, or else we shouldn't be calling them. That's another opinion. But their current MSP is absolutely telling them, we've got you covered.
Yeah.
Right. So we do need to be aware of that. So I like Guijae's thought process there on like, how do you know they have you covered? Are you aware that MSPs are frequently breached? What are they doing to limit the exposure and risk that they pose to you by working with you? Like, have you heard about this Kaseya breach? Like, I think we can actually take jabs at our own industry a little bit if we have our stuff together to kind of like build a little bit of doubt and just say, like, it's never a bad idea to have a second set of eyes look at this. And then you can go drive the value. We base our product selection on this. We believe, we have a whole system and a security offering that's separate from our MSP offer. Like that's where my mind goes. But you do have to be aware. Most people are not being told, hey, we suck at doing your security. they're being told we got you, and we need to, like, as the SDR, you need to cast doubt.
So I'm not the world's greatest salespeople, but I can actually recognize greatness in like Ryan and Guijae. But so remember in your early days, you remember feel, felt, found? Like that's the, all my clients feel that way, or whatever.
Yep.
But it seems to me if you had a feel, felt, found around somebody that thought they had security handled in that industry and they didn't, even if, it can't be your client, obviously, right? But you had a little like wedge story, right? Which was, I was just on the phone with somebody who felt the same way, right? Their MSP was telling them they're okay, but they found that they didn't actually, they were just kind of had firewalls in place. They had the first level of security, and what got them was the second and third levels that their MSP didn't tell them about, right? So it seems to me you could have a feel, felt, found story wedge that could actually achieve the same results.
Yeah, I would just say for the owners on the call, you really need to empower your sales team with differentiators other than we do a really great job and we're better than the other MSP, right? It's time to get specific. What do you do better? How do you do it better? What do your clients say about what you do better, right? Like, I would really spend some time thinking about that. There's people on here who have heard every which way of calling, from Robin Robbins to TrueMap. There's a million ways people are doing it, but I have a personal opinion that it's no longer.
I agree.
It's no longer good enough just to say we execute at a higher level than everyone else. I think it's time to get relatively specific, pull 2 or 3 things out of what you're doing, and empower the people calling to highlight those things and base it on the vertical.
I think something that I've learned from Ryan, and just being here for about 60 days now, is just his ability to tell the story and that value prop, right? The ability to go, I don't talk about MSP stuff because one, I've been onboarding for the past 60 days, but I don't think I need to, because the story that I tell is, listen, so our line of business, what we know is that when somebody is on CNN, they get breached and there's a ransomware attack. Well, we're the ones that are going in to do that recovery. We process roughly around 2,000 hours a month doing that work, and because of that, we've learned a thing or two. Traditional MSPs aren't really taking that approach, but because of that, we've gathered some data and made some decisions of how to protect our customers better. And because of that, we're trying to come and tie together IT ops and SecOps together. And just that story alone, I think is really powerful, and I think it builds credibility. I think Ryan brings in a lot of data around that.
Yeah, and I mean, we could craft other stories too.
Right.
So that's one that's going to have that story and narrative we need to create on what we do differently. And it needs to be relevant to what they're experiencing, right? So, I don't know, I just would really spend some time thinking about that. I think that's where you can start to see the ratios go up a little bit and get people to at least let you have a conversation and see if they're truly qualified.
Yeah, I think I just want to catalog what we talked about so far, because what I really want to do is put this into a curriculum and almost like a playbook. I hate to use that word, right? What we've said is it's important to know your niche, right? So you guys, by definition, are in a niche that you know well, and that's kind of where you're going to be hunting. 2 is you need to, I'm going to go to Guijae's term of pattern disruption. Is left to your own device, 99.9% of people are going to blow you off, right? if you don't interrupt the pattern. Was that fair, Guijae? Would you agree with that? Yeah. So there's this notion of quickly tell them who you are, and then what we're hitting on now is actually the most important part: is how do you differentiate and what kind of value is going to get them to stay engaged with you, right? That can't be generic anymore. I don't think.
I think one thing to note on pattern disrupt is not a byproduct of like words on paper that you spit out like, oh, this is one way to do it. It's so integrated. You got to have a mentality. You have to have an approach and a posture and a mentality that you're going in and spending time on each lead. I'm not saying spend hours researching them. All I'm saying is each time you call, you have to see it as an opportunity. You have to see it as, if I make this many dials and I get this many meetings, I know that what the output is because I have the data. And I think once you begin to think like that and have that approach, that is really going to shape the way you go about pattern disruption.
So Guijae, when I hear you saying that, I think one of the things I'd like you to talk through, because like when I think of volume prospecting, I think of just that volume, like quantity,
Right.
hit your number every day. How would you recommend, because there's few people in newer roles, or, you know, like how would you recommend that ramp up to where you get familiar with your list? Like, would you, if you had a new SDR and you say, hey, here's your 2,500, you know, companies you're going to call into, would you want, where are they spending that time doing the research? Are they doing it during the call block? Are they doing it out, like, walk me through your mindset of like, where do you spend the time doing the research?
Well, I'll make one quick comment, and I know this wasn't exactly what you meant by it, but if I'm doing onboarding, I'm building my SDRs a new list for like old customers or low-hanging fruit, so that they get some conversations in. If I'm calling my list of 200 old customers that 200 opportunities or people you've spoken to that never became a customer, they're gonna know, they're gonna be willing to talk. So I build that confidence and talk track and familiarity there. There's a lot more grace with those people. But to get to Ryan's point about how I think about it, I'll talk a little bit about calendaring. When I do my research is typically I have my reps towards the end of the day for about 30 minutes, look at their next tasks that are due for the next day, and just do a little bit of research of whatever that cadence is. It might be, hey, go look at LinkedIn, go look at their website, whatever those lists are. I do that towards the end of the day. Now, when I say end of the day, that's different for everybody. I do like calling people like between like literally like 5:15, depends on the business. But when you're done with all the prospecting, do a little bit of
What do you mean
homework.
5:15? What are you talking about?
Oh, 5 p.m., 5:15 p.m., sorry. Like towards
Okay.
the end of the day. I'm sorry.
Got it. Yep.
So at the end of the day, I like to call them from 5 p.m. to 5:15 p.m. their time. But let's say you're finished with all that. Do some research on your next day's prospect so that you're not spending your morning drinking your coffee or whatever your morning.
So put that in the
ritual is.
context. If you're going to do 150 dials tomorrow,
Yep.
What type of research are you going to do into those dials? Because 30 minutes doesn't sound like enough, right? Like I'm just trying to get you. Are you researching as you're dialing when you're first getting started until you get to a point where you're familiar with who you're calling? Because I do think there's like idea of familiarity with your list. Like that's what we're trying to do right now. So
I begin with segmenting my list. So if I have a list of 100 leads, I'm probably going to identify 10 to 15 that are hot leads, and that could be they were at an event. I have their mobile number. Believe it or not, that is a much obviously higher conversion than a desk phone. Things that I'm doing research on, things that kind of like spill over from past things. It could be a list of things. So I like to have a list of 10 hot, and then I'll have like 2 other tiers. I'm not for like the bottom 3rd tier. I'm not doing that much research. That maybe I took a quick glance, whatever. That's more of that volume prospecting. But tier 1 and tier 2, that's where I'm spending my time, whether it be on LinkedIn or what have you in the research channels.
Okay.
From there, I'm going, and then I keep it broad because everyone has a different process. But from there, on the day of, I do not negotiate my prospecting time if I'm in an IC, individual contributor sales rep position. I'm blocking off all the golden hours now because a lot of people have call data of when the conversation, like when people actually pick up and you log that call, you kind of have a good idea. For me, it was 7:15 to 8:25, 10:50 to 11 a.m., 11:50 to 12:15, et cetera, into the day. So I literally put on my calendar those blocks. And when I say those times, that's in the prospect's time zone. So let's say it's 10:50. Let's say they're in Chicago, but I'm on the East Coast and you're going to call them 11, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to make sure you block out times and hit the specific leads based on how you've segmented and categorized them.
Got it. No, awesome.
So I think the other one I heard, I think you said in there, Guijae, was 5 after 5. Because even if you make 5 calls after 5 o'clock, then 25 calls, you tend to hit, the person that was doing this in the MSP industry had more success at getting appointments out of those 25 calls than they did in the other 75 they made that day. So I think that's the same thought process you're going through.
So can we spend a minute, Michael, before we move on? So Guijae, what are you doing to up the conversion ratio? Like what else are you campaigning when you're calling? Right, because you're not just calling, like you're emailing. Like talk through like some of those more sophisticated campaigns and getting those ratios increased.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where it gets really fun. So typically my channels are going to be phone, email, LinkedIn, And on email, I also use video. So for those of you who don't know, there is a tool out there called Vidyard. There's also BombBomb, Wistia. There's a ton of them. Loom, and typically they're mostly free. And instead of putting text in the email, I'll record myself for 24 seconds and send it over. So that's what I meant video. So I consider that 4 channels, right? And so it's not just calling, but I typically in a normal, when I say cadence, I'm talking about the steps involved in what I send to the prospect. Without getting into too much detail, I'll go like day 1, day 3, day 4, day 3, 6, 7, 8, right? And with that, I have different tasks. Day 1, I might call once, email twice, or I'm sorry, email once, call twice. Without getting into all the details of what a cadence will break down into, something I like to do is something called a triple to start off a prospecting campaign. A triple is when you make a phone call, leave a voicemail, and send an email or LinkedIn, all in one thing with the end goal of grabbing their attention, but not being obnoxious. So an example looks like I call Michael, I don't get him, I leave a voicemail and go, Mike, Guijae Jang with Intera, I want to pick your brain about X, Y, and Z. Let me know when you can talk. Boom, hang up and leave that voicemail. I'm also going to send an email with the subject line, left your voicemail at 2:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, no subject line, sent. So that's a triple. The goal is to get their attention, and that open rate is like 80 to 90%.
I'm sorry, and that doesn't have the video on it, that last email?
It does not, no.
Okay.
I would use video later. Another combo you could do is call, voicemail, and then LinkedIn request, and in the subject line you could put, hey, left your voicemail about this. So everyone's got different appetite for how creepy you want to be, etc. But I've done it, it works, right? I don't have all the data in front of me at the moment, but again, pattern disrupt. Another tactic I like to use in tandem with my phone calls is that video. What I love to do with video is that it's got more dimensions, meaning one of the value props that I had was at my last company, I don't know if it really translates here, but it could. We helped companies with their uptime SLAs because they were all cloud-based. We helped them to make sure that their application was working 100% of the time, as close to 100%. So my reps would go to their website, do a video. You could share your screen and have your face be a little bubble, and I would go, hey, Mike, I was on your website. I couldn't help but notice that you guys have a very tight 99.99% uptime SLA. We work with Fastly and Cloudflare to help them maintain 100%. Wondering if you're interested in learning more. Boom, 24 seconds, subject line, quick 20-second video for you to look at with a thumbnail in the body. So these are just some examples of tactics that I've used in tandem with calling.
So let's go back to your cadence then. So you have, let's say you're trying to get a hold of Ryan, right? So you would do the call, the voicemail, and the email. When would be the next time you call Ryan?
Multiple cadences, but probably on day 3. After I do that, I do it day 3. Yeah. There's sometimes, because I think there's a sense of like, you don't want to, just common sense, you don't want to call somebody 5 times, that's just a little silly. So we'll do a triple and that's it, catch their attention, and then maybe wait till like day 3 to add, and then to engage them again.
So how is that cadence different than what you did in your triple, the second time you reach out?
So a triple would be in one step, day 1, it's
he's saying, so what's now 3 days later, so what are you going to actually do? Is it just a single call?
It's the same, yeah. Triples I use very conservatively, and then from there you follow your cadence. Let's say it's like day 1, day 3, day 7, day 10, then it's going to be one task per, one like phone call or one email per.
It's not another triple, in other words, right?
It wouldn't be another triple, no. I would use triples pretty conservatively, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different section we could definitely do, Mike. Sorry, it wasn't.
That's okay.
A whole thing that we could get into.
No, I think that, like I said, what this is setting up is like what the rest of the curriculum would look like, right? I think the other question I was going to ask was then you were going to talk a little bit about planning out your. Maybe this was Ryan was referring to earlier, but what would when you're helping your SDRs figure out how much activity they have to do, you had some kind of formula that you were telling me over the phone?
Ryan, Ryan, why don't I pull up the thing and you want to walk through it?
Yeah, and no, for everyone on the call, we're working on this because we're actually we're doing some addressable market exercises right now. And we'll build this in a way that we can share it to you and you guys can go through this. So I would say at the top level, this needs to be owner led. And then you would work with your SDR or your,
Are you guys
ISR,
gonna...
whatever they're called these days. Yeah, Guijae, can you share? Does it let you?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Need to go.
Let me give it to you. I got to give it to you, I think.
Oh.
Okay.
I think I just made you the presenter.
Okay.
There you go.
Guijae, have
Yes.
you worked on this since this morning or is it where we left it?
It's where we left it. We'll like the capture. Give me 1 second here. I gotta give permissions and. Oh God, give me Ryan. Can you talk for a minute? I gotta jump out and come back in to share my screen. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'll just kind of walk through what we were working on. So we were trying to just, we were looking at like top line metrics, number of dials to appointments, and be realistic with what that is. So I know when I was, calling full time, best in class was like 100 to 1.
Right.
But I know a lot of that is dependent on list quality. So we're not, because we're starting with like a net new list and net new market with a very specific vertical. I think we're looking at $250 to 1 appointment. So basically what we were trying to do is look at, average deal size, dial the conversation to appointment to close ratios, and determine if we have enough leads to hit our MRR goal that we have specific to volume prospecting, which for us next year off of volume gear, I think the number was 60K of new MRR we were looking to do.
Yep.
That's so 60,000. We have a new MRR goal of about 400,000.
One a month.
So for us, average deal size 30K. So we're actually going to do this whole entire volume prospecting exercise to try to get 2 deals.
Yeah.
But we wanted to build this in a way where you guys, for those of you who are using like clips or anything like that, I don't know if it's still called that, contact science, you should be able to extract this data and then see if you have enough, based on your current ratios, is there even enough business for you to get in your given market? And if not, we either need to up conversion ratios or expand market. So
Michael, can you make me the host again? I think when I came back in, I lost that privilege.
Okay. Did it get to you? Yeah.
There we go. So I'm gonna go to screen. Nope.
And Guijae, you can share our entire
Okay.
the XSP page if you want to. I don't mind.
There we go.
Do you guys see my screen?
We can see it. Yes, sir.
So I know it's a lot here. Just take 2 seconds to look at it, familiarize your eyes. But essentially what this is doing is, let's start with MR per month, right? This is what the output that we're looking at right here. And what is this based off of? It's based off of all of these conversion rates. Everything in yellow is something you can edit. So let's say, like Doug, it seems like you track your call data. Let's say you know that your ratio is 180 to 1. Boom, everything else updates. So for now, we put in 150.
And when we're saying 150, we're saying that's, so Guijae, walk through. So we're saying 150 calls for 1 appointment, and then we're doing the conversion rate of those appointments to close business. We're running right now at 5%.
Yep.
So that means I just want to make sure everyone's kind of following around with our mindset. So you can, if you're running at, if you get an appointment, if you get 10 appointments and you close 1, then you can up it to 10% and you'll see the numbers. But that's weird. And then if you look at the bottom over here where it says number of accounts, number of leads per account, we're trying to determine how many companies do we need on our list to hit these metrics, if that makes sense. Which that math may be off, Gary, because we said those numbers are too low. So ignore that part for now. We'll fix it.
Ignore this for now. Yeah. But so and then
can you unmute Doug Miller?
I think I can.
Because I know he's on the call.
Give me 1 second. I just got to find there. It's not in alphabetical order here. Let me. All right, I'll unmute Doug Miller now. You can,
Doug.
What are you going to put me on the spot?
I'm going to put you on the spot. So do you know, what is your call to appointment ratio currently? Do you like last 90 days?
We're probably somewhere, I would say we're at like 280, 300 calls to one appointment.
So let's go 280 to 1. And then what is your average MRR deal size?
3,700 a month.
3,700.
And then the question is, Doug, what are some of your so I know that when Ryan and I first started talking, he kind of was looking at it like, hey, from like qualified meeting until close. The way that we've done here, we've kind of sliced it a little bit more, right? So I have your meeting to SQ, so sales qualified lead. What I mean by that is I have a meeting with Ryan, let's say Ryan's a prospect, he's a CIO. And after that meeting, we determine that he's a good fit. There's alignment on next steps. So there's
That's probably 50%.
I was going to say more like 50. Yeah.
And then from that, opportunity is just defined as when do you commit it to pipeline? Where would you put that?
20 to offer to closed or no? So the statistic
No,
is
you're going to propose.
Yeah, I think that number's in our world that's so slightly irrelevant, but it's like the bottom.
It's going to be pretty high though. Like if they made it out of the first gate, they're probably going to get a proposal. Like they wouldn't even make it out of the first gate.
Yep. So then let's say like 90% of them are getting proposals.
There you go.
And then of the 90% you propose, what percent are you going to?
I'm going to say 25 to 50% you would win.
I'd say 50. You should win 50.
Sure. Let's just put 50 for sake of numbers, right? So, and then
so that would tell you then this is what we were trying to get to, and this is this can be spun a million ways, but at 900 dials per month, if those numbers hold true, then you should close on average of $2,600 in new MRR per month.
And that's $45,000 a day.
Yeah.
Where in your calculation are you counting the fact that like I can't call those same people again for some amount of time?
The 900 is including, this could be a span of 300 leads or 400 leads. So this is just considering a rep's output.
So
it's not number of businesses, it's number of dials.
Number of dials. So in other words, you could have 300 that you call 3 times. Did you get
exactly
that?
Which is what everyone's doing in contact science anyway, right? I mean, Doug, Josh is calling the same people like for 4 weeks in a row, correct?
Right. Yeah, and I think where my question was around like addressable market. I think I need to have like 4,000 contacts to get through a quarter of calling. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, we're just to be very upfront. We will have that part of this finished because we basically want to then be able to say, okay, if he's going to make 1,000 dials a month, how many contacts do you need on your list, so that you can determine, kind of basically your burn rate. But burn, we have to be careful with that definition too, because just because you're burning it doesn't mean you're not going to get an appointment from them in the future.
Sure.
Right.
No.
Right,
Yeah,
so,
I'm trying to say, like, I think a part of this equation is like how many prospective people I can call so that I don't run out of runway. Like I don't want my runway to end. I always want to have enough people to call, because the other thing, I don't know that we're counting, maybe it gets accounted in here somewhere, but you do pull people off the list over time too. Like they become unqualified at some point.
Exactly. Yep. Guijae, you're muted.
But does somebody want to talk? What do you want me to do?
You're muted.
Oh,
no, Guijae is just muted.
Oh, Guijae's fine. Yep.
I can't hear him.
Muted on his headset.
No, we lost you. Go to the GoToMeeting settings. It's on the right, underneath microphone. Make sure you got the right one.
I'll just the other thing I would put in this is like I know over time that ratio gets better. The warmer the list gets over time, that ratio does get better.
Yeah, that's why we're going off of, we don't have data, so we're trying to be very, very conservative in our ratios on conversions. But Doug, for you, you've got some pretty significant data from the work Josh has done.
I mean, at one point we were like 115 calls to an appointment. Like on our best list after it was super warmed up, it was 115 calls, almost like banging a drum.
Yeah, but what I like about this from the SDR perspective, for like if you're in Josh's shoes, how many dials is he making a month right now?
I think last month was like 840 something.
840. So if Guijae, can we hear you yet?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So change it to 840, and that gets him 2498. But if we bump that up to you know, what if we go 1,500? Then, you know, there's some ways, or if we get the conversion ratio up and we can get them from 280 to 1 to 150 to 1, like it's kind of like the, you know, REM, like how much more capacity you have for growth. So I think that's why it's for us, I want us to like religiously track these numbers and then go, okay, we did this campaign and our 280 went to 180, right? So, you know, that's what I'm interested in over time is how do we drive that 280 to, the first thing we need to address is the 280 to 1.
Yep.
Right. That sucks. Not in terms of the rep sucks. That just sucks in terms of all of that work for that little outcome. So what can we do to go from 280 to 1 to go to 200 to 1? Right. And I think that's where, you know, some of the things Guijae was mentioning earlier in tactics and tactical is where you can really start to influence these things.
See, to me, you know, if you were looking at this, Guijae, and you're saying, how would I improve the productivity of an SDR, right? So one thing is just literally how many calls they make, right? Do you track down how many conversations they have in those calls and the conversion rate of the conversation?
I do. I was looking for my last. So what I typically do is month over month, I have a spreadsheet because a lot of Salesforce CRM stuff isn't always great. So I have a spreadsheet of like what was our ratio. So when at my last gig, my SDR was at I would track tasks, conversations, what I call QBC, qualified business conversations. These are not talking to gatekeepers. This is like you spoke to a decision maker and you learned something about them, right? So these qualified business conversations in the meetings. My reps were at a 58 to 1 conversation to meeting ratio. And so it's okay. It's not, and keep in mind, conversation is also email responses and things of that nature. Call was a lot lower, right?
But I want to put that in perspective because 58 to 1, if you look at the amount of dials you would make to make 58 conversations, that's significant. And you're selling SaaS globally. MSPs, like our numbers have to be better than 58 to 1 because we would burn through. If Josh had to have 58 conversations to get a single appointment, there's not enough business in the world in San Antonio for him to get those, right?
If he doesn't mind us sharing the numbers, then like what it was 800 to 40, right? So that tells me
800 dials to 40 conversations to 1 appointment.
Yes. So what that tells me is we got to work in the conversations. It's not critical of anything. It's just how do we
no, but that's facts.
What do we do differently?
That's correct. We need to exactly.
Yeah.
Well, so another part about
can I ask
close the loop there.
Can I ask one other quick question? Then in your previous life, did you track, because you did the cadence, right? You had call 1, or you had event 1, event 2, event 3, event 4.
Yeah.
Did you ever track where you got the most appointments in those 4 events? Like, did you get?
Yeah, I at that stage, not at my last company, but in a bigger organization with more resources, I could. It's just at that time, someone's got to crunch that data, and it's like I don't have the bandwidth to do that. But yes, that definitely is something that's valuable to see. To close the loop on like the whole thing of like how do you make that ratio better? I've always believed that DQ data is equally as valuable as your output data, right? Disqualification data. So every time that there's a no, even though it's a conversation, I'm having my reps document that. What happened? Not interested? Okay, then let's go do call coaching. What is it that you said or you didn't say in order to get better? And every time that I have my one-on-ones with my reps, I'm looking at setting goals like, and I think that's this whole point, right? Some reps believe that this is micromanaging, but when you win them over to the data-driven approach to sales, they begin to realize that it's not micromanaging. It's you're trying to equip yourself with knowing what your capacity is. What are you able to produce? And so eventually you get to a place of going, okay, you're at a 58 to 1 conversation to meeting rate. Let's work to get that 10% month over month down, right? So how did we go from 58 to 50, and then we just have data and a feedback loop to get everybody else better because we're all learning.
I think the other thing that I want people to understand that it's even if you're not getting appointments, there's value in the process, right? Because you're setting them up for another future call block and all that kind of stuff. And you're getting information about what's working or not working, right? So to me, like you said, you can track the open rates on your emails that you send, so you can see if one type of email got more response than another, right? So the fact that you're not getting appointments doesn't mean that this is those non-appointments are useless, right? There's still a lot of
Right.
value in the stuff that you're doing in terms of
Yeah,
marketing.
and just for I mean, and Tara, we're about to go through this exercise, so because we're gonna build out an SDR team for our go-to-market for our new offering. So that's why we started doing this, and then Guijae is going to do it first. So we're going to have him kind of come through and get a good feel for it, and then based on his productivity, determine how we should build and staff out this team for what we want to get out of it. But I do think that Guijae, you're bringing up some interesting points, which is like Guijae was a sales manager of SDRs, right? We have a lot of IT owners who have never done the SDR role before. So Guijae, like speak to the owner on the call. Like if you're managing your sales folks, what time and effort are you putting in to help coach them along? Now, some of them have them in peer groups, which is great, where they can learn from others like this, right? But like, what do you think that majority of the people on the call, it's owner-led sales team. You know, what are you doing if you're an owner with your guy who's making, 800 dials per month to give him feedback to get him better?
Yeah, honestly, even when I was leading it as a manager, I would have 1 weekly check-ins, but it's all about having a very tight one-on-one session. So I'm talking about an hour. Like, of course, I'm gonna have casual check-ins here and there, but I'm talking formally to optimize and have feedback loop. I'm spending 45 minutes to an hour a week to really like come with a tight agenda of like, show me your metrics. What were we talking about last week? Did we do it? Yes or no? What did we tweak? Let's do some call listening coaching, et cetera, et cetera.
So you're listening with them?
I do. So I typically have call recording software. So I'm having them flag, and I'll even flag different calls so I could listen to it and do call coaching. Because it's one thing for the rep to come to me and go, this was a good or bad call. It's a different thing to hear the reality, obviously. So yeah.
Yep. Okay. Great.
So I wanted to just, you said it quick early on in the process, Guijae, but when I look at your 4 cycles or your 4-step process, to me, that's as much marketing as is prospecting, honestly. So I think if we think of it in those terms, then it's a success if people are opening our emails too, right? It tells us something about them, and that we could score them higher or score them lower based on that to put them in your top 25 or your lower 75 that you're talking about before. But so how do you think about marketing's integration with this process here? Are you dripping them after a call block, or is there any kind of, are you marketing to them while you're calling them, or how do you think about the integration?
It's so crucial. I see it as air cover, right? If I see SDRs as Navy SEALs, I see marketing as air cover, right? And so if SDRs are doing that one-to-one, I'm having marketing aligned to ICP. We're all on the same page about targeting. I think I've seen bigger marketing budgets where it's everything with digital display and all that. But if we're talking like nimble, agile, we're going through this right now. I'm actually going to be locking up Ryan and Ben, our CISO, in a room and having them record, which I think they're going to love anyways, but they're going to record an hour-long webinar on topic X, right? Whatever they're going to talk about. And then our marketing director and I, we're actually going to slice and dice those videos into 1.5-minute long conceptual videos and putting it into the channels of where they are. So as we are with that same messaging getting into our target account list for what we're doing as Intera, we're also getting that air cover through LinkedIn and digital and things of that nature. So that's a really simple, really cost-efficient way to do that air cover, which is through recorded sessions, and it's slicing into smaller videos and posting it into the channels that you believe your buyers reside.
It's interesting because
the other comment I want to make that, and this is, Guijae gets patted on the shoulders enough, but I'll do this more, is I really think for the, the inside sales or outside sales folks on the call, I really would encourage you to become a student of this and look at this as like your career development is directly related to, your performance within whatever box you're fulfilling. And although I'm a huge advocate for your owner spending time and giving you access and setting you up with the right messaging, which that's what they need to bring, you need to be very familiar with your own metrics. Like to Guijae's point, like I think you should be flagging calls going, what could I have done better? You should be like, what are my conversion ratios? Like I would really encourage you, like, own the role, because if you get a good handle on this and you learn how to manipulate these numbers, like you have a very bright future. But if you become a victim of the circumstance you're in because the list isn't good enough, so I'm just waiting on a better list, or you need to really be vocal. You're the front line. So the feedback you provide back to the owner or back to your manager is what allows them to make decisions to enable you to be better. If you're just sitting around and waiting for that to happen, it's going to be difficult for you to succeed. So, I remember in my early days, like I knew I had a shit list because it was half the numbers I called were horrible. Like, so, then I went to the owner of that company and we had, a very open conversation. Like, what are we going to do to fix this? Like, we need better quality leads. Like, we're wasting our time, right? I keep bringing up this stupid gold rush analogy because for some reason I keep binge watching that show, but like I'm just so fascinated with like make sure you're digging where there's actually gold, right? And if you're not, like you're literally wasting time, and if you are leaving gold in the ground, like that's the worst thing we could be possibly doing. So I think there needs to be, to Guijae's point, a very, very strong feedback loop between SDR or outside sales rep and manager and owner to make sure if the work you think you're doing is going to produce anything. If you don't, you need to speak up and vocalize it and try to help fix it, because you can't get your time back.
And know that by doing that, you're making an impact on the business. You have a say. Like, you are on the front lines, and that data of like maybe this isn't where the gold is something your owner is going to find a ton of value in. And I think that's how you're really going to make an impact, right? I always believe that, hey, if you're ever thinking about, growing in your career, getting promotions, like don't ask for the job, do the job first in a certain capacity, and then it'll come to you. So it's provide that feedback, build that engine yourself of all this data. Of course, there's frameworks here. That's why we're here to help out, to give you some perspective on how to gather that. But once you have that, that's, just to give you some perspective, I still pick up the phone, not because, I don't want to do it, because it's just a skill set I never want to lose. That's how I stay sharp right here. And that's I think genuinely by leading by example as a sales leader, is by picking up the phone and leading by example.
Yeah, and really track your process. Michael, I remember conversation after conversation, you had this whole mantra with me, was like, I can't remember how you'd say it, but you'd be like, you need to do what you do the same every single time until you change it forever, so that we can see what works and what doesn't work, right? So I remember early days, like I would do a call block and I would try something new for that entire call block, and we'd be like, did it work? No, it didn't. Okay, we're going to try something new. Oh, we found something that worked, so, but that wasn't the owner of the company coming to me. Like, that was me as the person responsible for the phone, like getting to take ownership of my role and go, what am I going to do to maximize, which then ultimately equals more commission, which we're all happy about.
That's right.
I think where, just listening to you guys talk, I think the things where the owners probably have less skill and where I think we could be most helpful is in what does a quality conversation look like, right? And how do we build the ability of SDRs to have quality conversations? I think that's the kind of qualitative part of all this stuff. And what would be interesting too is to say what particularly built it around security, right? How do you have that conversation about security, and how do you answer the objections about, I already got it in place?
More importantly, who are you having the conversation with? Like, as much as is important in the ICP of like the organization itself, right, you also need to have a very clear understanding of like, a practice manager in a medical office.
Right.
What is their like contextual understanding of security?
That's where I think
it is not the same as speaking to an IT director. So if I'm speaking to a medical practice manager, how do I tie security back to something she knows? Yeah. Well, naturally, I would think of HIPAA. Like I would think of security as it relates to their EMR. Like that. So I guess my point is like when you think of like quality conversations at a simple level, no one wants to talk to someone who doesn't understand what they're talking about, or could present something in a way that you can understand what they're talking about. Yeah. In its simplest form, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have conversations where they understand what we're saying and they feel like we understand what they do. Yeah. And you can't get there without research or without, spending the time to invest and do a little
I think it's a couple of, in the simplistic, but even starting with a couple of wedge questions, or pivot questions, right? Like somebody says that and having a story for that industry that's a feel, felt, found story, I think would be the two improvements we could actually make across the board.
Yeah. For Guijae and I right now, it's the absolute jackpot when we find a company that has an MSP and an MSSP. That's our jackpot. Like if we find one of those and we don't get an appointment, we would be severely frustrated with ourselves.
So that's, I mean, just so everybody knows, that's, so you're selling to somebody that already has hired somebody to do the job you want to take over.
Yes, and we want, because we want to do both things, right? So that, I mean, that's pretty easy to differentiate. I'm not going to lie, and I know other people are going to have a harder time differentiating that, but that's our ultimate, because we have real use cases of clients that we've displaced, both MSP and MSSPs, that we can speak to in the vertical of people that they're aware of.
But
right?
I mean,
So we're
go ahead,
you know,
sorry.
if, you go ahead. I'm just saying, if we get there, we better be asking the right questions.
Just kind of want to wrap it up, but I want to kind of think through where we take what we're doing now to a practical conclusion. Is I could see, for example, if we're going to start to set up these bi-monthly calls or monthly calls, whatever we choose to do, is that we should have homework whereby somebody comes up with, here is the segment we're going after, here's the conversation we want to have with security, here's our proof points based on proof points that we know the industry. I have to think about it, do that. And you need to have one story, right? Because I think we can think through creatively how we can help people develop their competencies. Because to me, that's, I mean, all this stuff is important, but to me is the non-numerical stuff is as important as the numerical stuff. Right?
Yeah, and we're talking about, I mean, to be clear today, we're talking about one of 5 things that need to be done to get appointments, right?
Correct.
We're only talking about volume prospecting. So I think a takeaway for everyone, and Gary, I'll put a little pressure on you if we can finish that Excel sheet in the next like 48 hours and get it to everyone. Go through and run your current ratios and see how much money you're going to make. Do the exercise. Like, where are you at? Are you going to make, are you going to do 24,000 a new MRR? Are you going to do 10 and understand those ratios? And then I think the other thing is I would, you know, sorry, so that's task 1. Task 2 is go through the exercise and figure out, well, you need, I hope you know who your ICP is now, but really, what are those differentiating talk tracks where you can do the disruptors, the wedge questions, and also the, you know, bringing up stories of other clients and interject those into your calls. So what you can't be empowered as a ISR in this call to be, well, just tell them we're a better MSP than everyone else. It's not going to work. So get more creative. What else can we do? Like what can we highlight that we do, who we work with? You know, that's my thoughts. But
one other tactical point, if it could be a homework assignment, is I can't stress the importance of talking to your customers. Like if you come from a new space or don't understand your ideal customer profile, ask your owner for one meeting with a top client that's going to do that for you, and ask them a couple of questions. Why did you buy? How do you describe us to your peers? What is it that we do for you? What is the value that you're like? Just hear how they speak, because I'll just give you a very practical example. Our marketing team gave me jargon such as oh, they want to do production Linux workloads for streamlining uptime SLAs, right? But when I spoke to the customer, they said, oh, it helps us to maintain our business and remain it up in the cloud. Yep. That's how they spoke. It wasn't the technical jargon. Just ask them how they talk about you as a partner. I can't stress how important that is, because that drives your confidence. That gives you a sense of how they speak. And then when you speak to that prospect, who is your ideal customer that looks like them, it's all tied together.
No, this has been good for me. So just so everybody on the phone knows, I'm personally very committed to this program and making it as much as I, and I'm actually astoundingly grateful for Ryan and Guijae to lead the charge on this. But what I really want to do is kind of lay out the word I keep using, competency model, but just what are the things we want to make sure people, what kind of skills we want to make sure people build.
I actually think you have the framework and the pillars. Like I think we just keep these topics to pillar specific, and you could literally hit these over and over and over again and pull something new out of them. So that would be my thought. I guess we could also ask for feedback from people if they want.
Yeah, I think the other thing, Ryan, is then we should work out the schedule, like how often we're going to do these and for how long, and then.
Yeah, and I don't think it's, you know, I think Guijae and I can certainly attend all of them if we need to, but there are some folks doing some things really, really well, like specific to those, you know, those pillars that we definitely want to hear from too. Yeah. So I think, you know, we just
I'm with you
level, go bi-weekly, because I think and Guijae, we probably want to get our sales team included in these too, but go bi-weekly and hit each of those pillars. What time does this end?
Ends in We can end it. It's supposed to end at 1:15, but we're cool. We got 5 more minutes.
All right, Guijae, do one last share and show them the XSP page, because I just want people to see what we're thinking as strategy as it relates to basically it's the pillars.
Do you see it?
No, you're still on the old one. There it is. So I won't dive in, but we basically are going through and trying to project what we need to do in each pillar in order to hit our target. And we do have the least amount of historical data we have is around actually the outbound marketing strategy. We have the most historical data on inbound referrals. But I just want you to see, like over here on the right, like we're looking to get one closed deal out of a historical loss, meaning we went through all of our data, we found someone we can repop. We're going to do some outsourcing with the SDR. I won't get into that today, but 2 deals there, 2 from events, 1 from partners, and then 2 from Pam and I referring. Now we're doing average 25, 30,000 a month, which is why we're doing all this effort to try to get 8 net new customers, but our sales processes are really long. But I just want people to see like the way we're thinking of it. We're basically going here, from a top line perspective, we want to get to 950,000 of MRR back into it based on what we've done historically. Where are they going to come from? Where are we short? And we're going to have to put more effort in those areas, which is why we're building out the SDR.
I'd say more events, dude, first of all, but we can talk about this later if you want to.
Yeah, well, that's 2 closed deals. We'll go to lots of events, but our prospects take a long time to actually buy from us. So we'll do events every month, but we're just we're trying to be conservative.
Your Ryan Pam numbers.
Also
Your Ryan Pam numbers real low too, dude.
But that's closed deals. So we're that might mean I need to intro like 5 people.
If that number's not 6, I'll be 6 or higher. I'll be surprised.
Yeah. We'll see.
Keep in mind that this is our hypothesis is that it's a 6-month cycle. So with that being said, all these activities for pipeline build and things like that need to be finished by June 2022, not for the 12 months. I feel like that's a big thing that a lot of operators miss out on, which is they plan for 12 months runway and set up their meetings and all that with that in mind. But you need to stop all your marketing. Well, don't stop your marketing activity, but you need to reach a certain point by June 2022 in order to hit these numbers. So just a little caveat there that a lot of people miss.
So you're kind of always planning in advance. But all right, you can stop sharing. We can share all these things. That's just how we're looking at it.
And I was going to say, and we'll do this one. We did this in this format just because we wanted it to be more of a training session for people. But in the future, we'll figure out the mix, but we'll have some where you guys can interact more. So people on the phone, and maybe even ask questions of Guijae and Ryan. But it's a good start, guys, and I really appreciate you guys doing this. And the 3 of us can collaborate on the scheduling and the content kind of going forward. But I think we have the general commitment. We'll try to do one twice a month, maybe 45 minutes or something like that. We'll work out the actual time and content going forward and get back to everybody after this.
Cool. Thanks, Michael.
For any of the owners out there, I'm so down to connect with your reps. Always happy to talk shop. Ryan and I talk like all the time about on the work, off the work stuff, and I'm always down to, because again, the whole being a student of the game is, you're just can't help but to this tick of like, I want to figure this thing out. So I'm happy to talk for 15, 30 minutes. Like, feel free to have your reps connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat.
And ultimately, over time, we will set up a team site that we can all be on, so we can start sharing stuff and dialoguing that way as well. So if you guys are open to that too, so I'll actually try to do that over the weekend.
Awesome.
By the way, Guijae, here's a test. Ryan, Guijae also talked a little bit about one of the pillars. What did he mention? The surgical prospecting pillar.
When did he?
Yeah, so part of it is this idea of the 25 more personal calls versus the 7.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's just, if you expand that, that's surgical.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep, agreed. Yeah. Cool.
All right, everybody, thank you for the time, and I will make the recording available to you, and we will get back to you with our game plan.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye. I think I turned off.